used to think sickness was something that happened to other people. That sounds stupid now, but it's true. I wasn't careful. I did what I wanted. I slept around when I was younger, told lies when it made things easier, and never once thought anything bad would stay with me. Even when people around me started dropping weight, getting strange infections, disappearing for weeks and coming back looking like somebody had emptied them out from the inside, I still thought I was different. I thought I was lucky. Then I got sick for real. It started with things I could explain away. Fevers, night sweats. I'd wake up soaked, kick the blanket off, tell myself the radiator in the apartment was messed up again. My throat kept getting raw. Food started tasting wrong. I had this patch on my tongue that looked like milk stuck to it. I scraped at it until I bled. I kept going to work because I needed the money, and because I didn't want to hear what anybody thought was wrong with me. By the time I finally went to the clinic, I already knew. People act like there's always this big dramatic moment where the doctor says the word and your whole life changes in 1 second. That's not how it was for me. The waiting room was dirty. A baby cried behind a divider. A woman argued with the receptionist about insurance. The doctor looked tired before he even sat down. He talked to me like he'd had the same talk 1,000 times. He said HIV first, then later AIDS, once they ran more tests, and told me how bad it already was. He used words like advanced and compromised and treatment plan. I watched his mouth move and I kept looking at the skin on his face. Healthy skin, tight around the eyes, color in his cheeks. I hated him for it before he was even done talking. He asked if I had someone with me. I told him no. He asked if I wanted to speak to a counselor. I told him no. He asked if I understood what he was telling me. I said yes, but what I really understood was this. Somebody had put this in me, and I was supposed to sit there and act civilized about it. I walked out with a folder full of papers and sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel. I kept thinking of all the people I'd touched and all the people who'd touched me. Faces came and went. Some names I remembered, some I didn't. One of them had done this. One of them had known, maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe it had just moved from body to body like a rat in a building, and I happened to be the room it finally cornered itself in. The worst part wasn't fear. It wasn't even the shame. It was the feeling that everybody else got to keep walking around in their clean skin, while mine had turned into something contaminated. I started treatment. I took the pills. I went to appointments when I could make myself go. I told almost nobody. My sister knew because she saw the medication in my kitchen and pushed until I snapped and told her. She cried. Then she asked who gave it to me. Like I could answer that. Like I kept a list. I told one woman I'd been seeing on and off. I didn't do it because I wanted to be honest. I did it because I was afraid she'd hear from somebody else. She went pale and backed away from me like I'd turned into an animal. She kept asking if I had given it to her. I said I didn't know. She started crying too. Then she got angry. She called me disgusting. Said I ruined her life whether she had it or not because now she had to wait and see. That was the first time I understood something clean and simple. People didn't just fear getting sick. They feared becoming me. Once I understood that, I started seeing it everywhere. The pharmacy tech sliding my pills across the counter without touching my hand. My boss telling me I looked rough and maybe I should take some time off, but not sounding concerned. just eager to have me gone. The woman downstairs, the one who used to flirt with me near the mailboxes, suddenly refusing to share the elevator when I got in. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't. It didn't matter. The whole world felt like it had already made room to put me somewhere separate. I lost weight. My gums bled when I brushed my teeth. I got tired easy. My apartment got filthy because every little thing started feeling heavy. Laundry piled up. Dishes crusted over. I'd sit in the dark and think about all the people still living the life I used to have. Complaining about traffic. Buying groceries. Going on dates. Laughing in bars with warm blood under their skin. I couldn't stop thinking about the unfairness of it. It sat in me all day long. It got bigger. A decent person would tell you they got bitter, but fought it. They found support. They made peace with what happened. I didn't do any of that. I fed it. I started going online at night. Not support groups, not medical pages, forums, local groups, social sites, dating apps, anything where people put their habits and weaknesses in public without knowing it. It was easy to learn what kind of person would come to a house they'd never been to if you said the right thing. Loneliness makes people stupid. Need makes them worse. I didn't jump straight to what I became. That would be a lie. At first I just talked. I made fake profiles. Different names. Different pictures. Sometimes I used my real face from before I got really thin. I'd talk to women who were newly divorced. Men who didn't want anybody to know what they were into. College kids who thought being reckless made them interesting. I'd set up meetings just to see if they'd really come. A lot of them did. I rented a house after I got fired. Not a nice one. Not even close. It sat outside town on a road that got dark fast once the streetlights ran out. The property used to belong to an older couple who died within a year of each other. Their son sold it cheap because the roof had problems and the basement smelled like wet concrete. I used what money I had left, and the little my aunt left me when she died. I told people I wanted quiet, that I was done with the city. What I wanted was distance. The house had a long gravel driveway and a stand of trees on one side thick enough to block the neighbors from seeing much. The garage leaned a little. The back deck had rotten boards near the steps. The inside smelled like old smoke and bleach. Best of all, the basement had been half finished at some point. Somebody had put up cheap walls and an extra door down there for storage. I changed the lock. I added latches. I put weather stripping around the frame because the first time I stood in that room and shut the door, I could still hear the hum of the refrigerator upstairs. After I sealed it better, sound didn't travel as much. I cleaned that room more carefully than I had ever cleaned anything in my life. Not because I cared about hygiene, because I cared about control. I brought in a metal bed frame from a hospital surplus place 2 counties over. The mattress had a plastic cover. I bought restraints online under the excuse of home medical care. I bought a workbench and bolted it to the wall. I bought shelving, storage tubs, heavy contractor bags, drain cleaner, lime, bleach, gloves, tarps, and tools. Some of those things I used. Some I bought just because it felt good to prepare. A person can get used to almost anything if they repeat it often enough in their mind. I would stand in that room and picture someone in it. I'd imagine the sound of them realizing they weren't leaving. I'd imagine the change in their voice when confidence drained out and fear took over. The first few times I thought about it, I felt sick. My heart would pound so hard I had to sit down. Then the feeling changed. It became calming. I told myself stories about justice because it sounded better than what it really was. I said the world had done this to me. I said people lied about their status, cheated, used each other, spread ruin and walked away. I said I was only making the truth visible. Deep down, the real thought was uglier and more honest. If I had to be this thing, somebody else had to feel it too. The first person I brought there was a man named Darren. At least that's the name he gave me. He was in his 30s, thick through the shoulders, with one of those open faces that made him seem more trustworthy than he probably was. He answered an ad I posted on a site meant for men looking for hookups without too many questions. His messages were direct but not threatening. He told me he was discreet. He told me he didn't host because he had a roommate. I told him I had a place outside town and preferred privacy. He asked for a photo. I sent one from years earlier. He said nice. That one word made me hate him. He showed up in a pickup that sounded rough at the muffler. He parked by the garage and got out with a little grin on his face, the kind men wear when they think the night's going their way. He didn't look nervous. He looked excited. He had no idea what house he was standing in. I met him at the door and kept the porch light behind me. He came in smelling like aftershave and cigarettes. He glanced around the living room and said the place was bigger than he expected. I told him it was a work in progress. He laughed. He asked if I wanted a drink. I had already drugged the bottle I handed him. That part wasn't dramatic either. People make being drugged sound instant. It isn't. He drank, sat on the couch, talked about his job installing flooring, asked me where I was from. I answered enough to keep things smooth. 20 minutes later, his eyelids got heavy. He laughed at himself, said he must be more tired than he thought. I said it happens. When he tried to stand, his knees gave a little. He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw the first flicker of concern. He said, "What was in that?" I told him to sit back down. He tried to push past me toward the door. He got 2 steps and almost fell. I caught him under the arm, not out of kindness, but because I didn't want him cracking his head open on the corner of the table and making a mess before I got him downstairs. He kept asking what I did. His words started slurring. That panicked tone came in around the edges. It sounded exactly like I had imagined. I dragged him to the basement while he was still partly awake. That was stupid. I know that now. He hit the wall twice going down the stairs and started trying to fight. Not well, but enough to make it harder. He clawed my wrist. He got a mouthful of my shirt and tore it. By the time I got him into the room, both of us were sweating hard. I strapped him to the bed and waited. When he woke up fully, he stared at the ceiling first. Then he lifted his head and saw the restraints. Then he saw me sitting on the stool by the wall. There is no acting in that kind of moment. You know when fear is real because the body tells the truth before the mouth does. His breathing changed. The muscles in his neck stood out. He tugged at the straps once, hard, then twice more, testing whether panic could break leather. He asked what this was. I didn't answer. He asked if I wanted money. I said no. He tried a different tone then, calmer, like he was handling a difficult customer. He said maybe this was a misunderstanding. Maybe I wanted to scare him and that was enough and we could both just forget it. When that didn't work, he started making promises. He said he wouldn't call the cops. He said he wouldn't tell anybody. He said whatever I was into, we could talk. I told him I was sick. He frowned like he hadn't heard right. I said I have AIDS. That word changed his face more than the restraints had. He went still in a way that wasn't calm, just stunned. Then he started shaking his head, fast, hard, like if he moved enough he could push the meaning away. I took out the syringe and watched him understand before I explained anything. He started screaming then, not loud and strong the way they do in movies. Messy, breaking apart in the throat. He kept saying no. He kept saying please. He said he had kids. He said he had made a mistake coming there. He said he was sorry for whatever he'd done. He tried to bargain with a thing that had already decided. I told him somebody did it to me. He said he wasn't that person. I said it didn't matter. He twisted so hard against the straps he rubbed the skin raw around one wrist. I had drawn my own blood earlier that day. I didn't know if it would work the way I imagined. I wasn't thinking scientifically. I was thinking emotionally, with the logic of a person who wanted his pain to become physical in somebody else. He begged until his voice went hoarse. Then he started threatening me. That came after the begging failed. He said if I let him go, he would hunt me down and kill me. He said people would find him. He said his phone would show where he'd been. That part actually worried me for a second. But I had already taken his phone from his pocket and shut it off. I injected him anyway. It was not clean. It was not simple. He jerked. The needle tore skin. I had to do it twice because my hand slipped the first time. He screamed and cried and thrashed like a hooked fish. When it was done, I stepped back and looked at him and waited for some huge feeling of victory. What I felt instead was disappointment. Nothing changed. He was still him. I was still me. He spat at me and called me a dead man. I left him down there overnight. I told myself I needed time to think. Really, I was afraid. Afraid of what came after the thing I had spent months imagining. The next morning he was quieter. Exhaustion had flattened him. His eyes were bloodshot. He asked for water in a voice that barely sounded human. I gave him some through a straw because I didn't want to unstrap him. He drank like his whole body hurt. He asked me if I was going to let him go. I knew I couldn't. The minute I admitted that to myself, something else fell away too. A last piece of normal thinking. Up until then, there had still been a part of me that thought this was one act, one terrible break, and then I would stop. But once someone is tied in your basement and knows your face and your voice and what you've done, there is no going back to being a troubled guy with bad thoughts. You are either caught or you keep going. I smothered him with a plastic dry cleaning bag because I didn't want blood everywhere. That took longer than I expected. Much longer. His heels hammered against the bed frame, his arms strained. There was a wet choking sound that I still hear sometimes when the house gets quiet. When it was over, he looked smaller. That was the first strange thing I noticed about dead people. The force goes out of them so completely that they seem to lose size. I cut him up in the basement. I'm not telling you that for shock. I'm telling you because it happened, and because there's no clean way to summarize what a body turns into once you stop calling it a person. It was hard work. harder than anything I had done in my life. My back hurt for 2 days. My hands cramped. I vomited once into a bucket, rinsed my mouth and kept going. The smell stayed in the concrete even after bleach. I buried what I could in sections of the yard where the ground was softer near the tree line. Some parts I sealed and put out with trash over several weeks, buried under other garbage, cat litter, spoiled food, anything to make them less noticeable if a bag split. Nobody came asking about Darren, or if they did, they never made it to me. After that, sleeping got easier. That probably sounds backwards, but it's true. Before the first time, my head was crowded. Afterward, things were simpler. I had crossed something. I no longer needed to wonder what kind of person I was. Once that question was answered, there was relief in it. I got better at luring people, better at choosing. You learn from mistakes. Don't pick someone too connected. Don't pick someone who tells too many people where they're going. Avoid people with children in every profile picture, because somebody will notice faster when they vanish. Men were easier than women at first, because more of them would show up quietly and lie about where they were. Later, I stopped caring as much about categories. I looked for desperation, secrecy, bad judgment, and the kind of confidence that makes people walk into danger if it's wrapped in the right promise. I changed vehicles often when meeting them away from the house. Sometimes I had them come straight there. Sometimes I met them in a parking lot first, made them follow me. Sometimes I told them my GPS was bad and talked them through the turns over the phone. The house became the center of everything. The road, the driveway, the front door, the basement room. My body got weak, but my routines got strong. There was a woman named Nicole who came because I told her I was recently separated and lonely. She was older than her photos, maybe 45, with lines around her mouth and tired eyes that looked honest. She talked too much when she was nervous. I listened while she told me about her ex-husband and how he made her feel invisible for years. I made dinner because she seemed like the kind of person who would be suspicious if I moved too fast. She noticed the framed family photo on the shelf, even though there were only 3 things on that shelf. It was one I bought secondhand with strangers in it, a husband and wife and little boy in matching sweaters. She picked it up and smiled sadly and asked if that was my family. I said it used to be. She touched my wrist and said she was sorry. For a second, I almost called it off. That's the truth. Not because I felt bad for her exactly, but because she looked at me with a kind of pity I hadn't seen in a long time. I realized she thought I was hurt in some ordinary way. Divorced, damaged, reachable. She had no idea she was sitting across from someone who had already buried a man in pieces. Then she started talking about trust. She said people have to choose to trust again after they've been betrayed. I remember staring at her mouth while she said it. Trust again. Like trust was some nice thing laid out waiting for people who deserved it. I drugged her wine. She didn't fight as hard as Darren had. She cried more. She kept asking what I wanted from her. When I told her, she gagged and turned her face away. She said that wasn't possible. She said no one would do that. Then she looked back at me and saw that I would. She begged me not to use her like that. That's how she put it. Use. As if what I was taking from her wasn't just blood or health or years, but the rest of her life with other people. That was when I understood the real horror of it. It wasn't just dying. It was what comes before. The waiting, the tests, the fear of who you've touched, the way other people start doing the math in their heads when you tell them. I held her arm down and did it anyway. She vomited after. I think from panic more than anything. She cried for hours. The next day she went dull and wouldn't speak. She just stared at the corner of the room and shook sometimes. I had to kill her that night because I couldn't stand the sound of those small animal breaths she kept making. With Nicole, I used a hammer. I told myself it would be quicker. The first hit didn't kill her. It split the scalp and stunned her, and opened one eye in a way that made the white show all around. The second hit crushed more. The third finally ended it. My shoes stuck to the floor afterward. I threw them in the burn barrel out back with the tarp and the bedding. The smell of hair and blood and cheap rubber melting together turned my stomach so badly, I sat on the ground dry heaving under the stars. You might think somebody doing what I did would get sloppier over time, more reckless, drunk on power. In some ways I did. In other ways I got careful to the point of obsession. I cleaned under my fingernails with a knife. I burned clothes. I changed locks. I memorized routes out of the county if I ever needed to leave in a hurry. I listened to police scanners. I followed missing person groups online. Sometimes I even read the comments under posts from worried families and felt a low, private heat in my chest. That was mine, I'd think. Your tears, your posters, your questions. All of it was circling around something buried in my yard. I know how monstrous that sounds. It was monstrous. I still had moments where I looked at what I was doing from a distance and felt like I had slipped out of the human world entirely. Those moments never lasted long. Hunger, anger, physical pain, loneliness. They all pushed me back into myself. I became very practical about evil. There was a man named Luis who almost killed me. He came through a rideshare app account I had started using to find people late at night. Some riders will talk to anybody if they're drunk enough. He wasn't. He was sober, polite, and on the way back from visiting his mother in the hospital. I almost didn't pick him because he seemed too normal. Then he mentioned he'd had a terrible week and just wanted one decent thing before going home. He wasn't asking me directly. He was just talking. But I knew then what kind of opening it was. I told him I was off shift soon. He laughed and asked if I was hitting on him. I said maybe. He studied me in the mirror for a second, then said maybe he wouldn't mind. He was at my house less than an hour later. I made a mistake with him by not using enough sedative. He had a bigger body than the others, and I guessed wrong. By the time I got him into the basement room, he was groggy but not under. He let me strap one wrist before he understood. The second he did, he drove his forehead into my face so hard I saw a white flash and dropped the restraint. He got off the bed, one hand still half buckled, and shoved me into the workbench. Tools crashed to the floor. I grabbed a wrench without even meaning to and swung. It clipped his shoulder. He charged me anyway. We went down together. He was stronger than me by far. Sick men do not wrestle well. I felt the air go out of me under his weight. He had his hands on my throat when I jammed 2 fingers into the open metal buckle at his wrist and twisted until it tore skin. He yelled and loosened up just enough for me to bring the wrench into the side of his head. One hit, then another, then another. The sounds changed with each one. After the 4th hit, his body sagged but didn't go still. His legs kept jerking. Blood spread under his ear in a slow dark sheet that found the slope in the concrete and moved toward the drain. I crawled backward and sat there with the wrench in both hands, waiting in case he got up again. He didn't. That was the first kill I hadn't planned all the way through. It scared me more than the others, because it showed me how fast things could go wrong. If he had been a little stronger, if my hand had missed the wrench, if I had fallen a different way, I would have died on that basement floor with a man I brought home to infect and murder. Maybe that should have stopped me. Instead, it made me meaner. After Luis, I started keeping people restrained earlier. I also started using a stun gun on some of them. It left burns and made them piss themselves sometimes, but it gave me control. Once control becomes the main thing feeding you, you'll do whatever keeps it intact. My health kept sliding. Pills or no pills, years of neglect and missed appointments had done their work. I got infections in my gums. My legs cramped at night. I had sores that took forever to close. Some mornings I would climb the basement stairs after cleaning and have to sit halfway up because black spots crowded the edges of my vision. That weakness made me angrier. I would look at the people tied down there, flushed with fear and alive in the full, stupid way healthy bodies are alive, and feel this boiling hatred. They still had choices. They still had futures. Even if I took them, they had existed a few minutes earlier. Mine had shrunk to the size of my property line and the walls of that house. I started talking more to them. At first I had been quiet. After a while I wanted them to hear me. I wanted to explain the shape of my anger even though no explanation would ever make sense. Some listened because they had no choice. Some cursed at me. Some prayed. One teenage boy, barely old enough to shave, kept apologizing for things he hadn't done, like he thought he could find the right combination of words and unlock whatever had broken in me. He was the one that bothered me afterward. His name was Evan. He told me that after I took his phone and wallet and tied him up, he had answered a fake ad for concert tickets and drove out because he thought he was getting a deal. When he saw me instead of another kid, he hesitated, but not enough. Greed and trust mixed together will put people in the worst places. He cried for his mother before he cried for himself. I asked how old he was. He said 19. He looked younger. When I told him what I was going to do, he didn't fully understand. Not at first. He knew what AIDS was in the loose public way everybody does, but it was still something from TV, from health class, from stories about other people. I watched the truth land slowly. That made it worse. He kept saying no, no, no under his breath, not even to me, just to the room. I should have killed him immediately. Instead, I sat there and let him talk, because I wanted to hear a young person try to reason with a dead part of the world. He told me his mom depended on him. He said he worked nights at a grocery store. He said he never did anything bad to anybody. He asked me if someone had done this to me when I was his age. That question hit something unexpected. Not because of what he meant, because he asked it with real curiosity, like he was still trying to understand, still trying to place me inside a human story. I told him nobody did this to me on purpose, at least not that I knew. He said then, "Why are you doing it on purpose to me?" I slapped him so hard his lip split. He started crying again. Quieter that time. I used the syringe. My hand was shaking. He flinched before the needle even touched him. I remember that detail because it was so small and frightened, like a reflex from childhood. For a second, I saw every shot he'd probably ever gotten from a school nurse. His arm turned away, his face scrunched up, not knowing one day it would end in a basement with a dying stranger leaning over him. I left the room and stood outside the door for a long time. He kept calling for me, then for his mother. Then he started screaming to anybody who could hear. But there was nobody around for miles, and the room had insulation in the walls by then. When I finally went back in, he had exhausted himself. He asked me very calmly if I was going to kill him too. I said yes. He nodded once and said, "Okay." That okay stayed with me. Not because it forgave anything. It didn't. It was just the sound of a person understanding the edges of his world all at once. I cut his throat because I couldn't stand prolonging it. Blood moves with more force than people think when the heart is still fighting. It hit my shirt. It sprayed the side rail of the bed and the plastic curtain I had started hanging nearby for cleanup. He made this awful wet pulling sound and stared at me with total disbelief, not because he thought I would spare him, but because the body always looks shocked when it starts failing. Hands went to his neck automatically, even though I had one wrist strapped and the other only partly free. He drowned in his own blood while trying to breathe through a hole I had made. I had nightmares after that, not moral ones, just sensory ones. Waking with the taste of iron in my mouth, hearing that pulling breath, smelling the hot copper stink of fresh blood in the room even when I was upstairs. I drank more after Evan. Whiskey mostly because it burned enough to cut through memory for a while. People imagine men like me never feeling fear. That isn't true. Fear became constant. Every car slowing on the road, every knock I wasn't expecting, every unfamiliar number calling my phone. I lived in this locked rhythm of appetite and dread. I'd go days convinced the police were about to come up the driveway. Then the fear would ease. Then the anger would take over again. And I'd start looking online for the next person. My sister stopped visiting after the second time she came by unannounced, and I wouldn't let her in. I told her I had the flu. She said she could hear the TV and knew I was lying. She stood on the porch getting more upset while I stood on the other side of the door sweating because I had a woman tied in the basement under the vent. Eventually, she told me I was sick in the head long before I got sick in the body. Then she left, and I didn't hear from her for months. Maybe if she had come inside that day, something would have ended sooner. Or maybe she would have ended in the basement too. I don't know. I've thought about that more than I should. The last one was named Rachel. I say last because that's the one that broke the pattern. Not because I chose to stop. She found me, really. I had posted in a local group under a fake account about needing help moving a dresser and offering cash. It was the kind of small job that attracts people with not enough money and too much trust in the basic decency of strangers. Most replies were from men. Rachel messaged because she said she did odd jobs all the time, and her brother usually came with her, but he was out of town. She needed the money by the weekend. I almost ignored her. Taking a woman alone in daylight felt riskier. Then I looked at her profile. Sparse. Not many friends. A few photos. One with a pit bull. One with a cigarette hanging from her mouth while she laughed at whoever was taking the picture. Tough looking, but that doesn't mean hard to trap. She showed up in work boots and a faded red sweatshirt with paint on one sleeve. Mid-30s maybe. Strong arms. Hair tied back. She looked around the property in one quick sweep, that told me she paid attention more than most people did. I had already set the dresser near the basement door to make the excuse easier. She came in, wiped her boots, and said the place smelled weird. I told her the basement got damp. She asked where I needed the dresser. I said downstairs. She looked at me and said that thing isn't fitting down those steps unless we angle it. I said that's why I needed help. We got it halfway down before I made my move. I had the syringe ready in my pocket, loaded with sedative. The plan was to stab her in the side of the neck or upper arm while she was focused on the awkward weight, then shove, then finish restraining her once she got weak. Bad plan. The second the needle touched her skin, she dropped her side of the dresser and spun on me. Not confused, furious. She punched me in the mouth so hard I tasted blood and one of my teeth went loose. I jammed the plunger anyway, but I wasn't sure how much got in. She grabbed my wrist and smashed it against the wall until the syringe fell and skipped down the basement stairs. Then she ran. I caught her by the back of the sweatshirt before she reached the kitchen. The fabric tightened at her throat, and she fell backward, slamming me with an elbow to the ribs. We both went into the table. A chair snapped under us. She scrambled on hands and knees toward the front door. I got hold of her ankle and she kicked free with the other foot, heel catching my cheekbone. My eyes watered. She got the door open. That should have been it. If she had kept running, she might have made it to her truck and out to the road. Instead, she turned on the porch and screamed that I was trying to drug her. No one heard. The nearest house was too far. Wind moved through the trees. Her voice went nowhere useful. I rushed her before she could get her phone out. We hit the porch rail together and it gave way under our weight, because the wood was rotted near the base. She fell off the side and landed badly, one leg folding under her with a crack that made even me freeze. She screamed again, but now it sounded raw and shocked. Bone had come through the fabric near her shin. She still tried to crawl. That was Rachel. Broken leg, dirt under her nails, dragging herself through dead leaves with one hand and fumbling for her phone with the other. I stamped on her wrist to stop that hand. The phone flew out of reach. She looked up at me, and in that instant there was no confusion at all. She knew exactly what I was. She said, "If you take me in that house, I'll kill you." I believed she meant it. I dragged her anyway. The broken leg made it ugly. She fought every inch of the way, clawing the ground, grabbing roots, hitting whatever part of me she could reach. By the time I got her inside, my lungs were burning, and she had torn the skin off the back of my hand with her nails. In the basement room, she kept trying to sit up despite the restraints in the leg. Sweat poured off her. Her face had gone gray around the mouth. I thought shock would quiet her. It didn't. She stared at me with more hatred than anyone I'd ever taken there. I told her to save her strength. She laughed in my face. When I explained what I was going to do, she didn't beg. She said I was filthy. She said I was a coward who needed tied hands to feel big. She said if I had any nerve at all, I would untie her and try it standing up. I called her stupid for coming there alone. She said, "No. You did this because you're scared of people seeing you." That landed harder than I wanted it to. I hit her across the mouth. She spit blood at me and smiled through it. The sedative I'd managed to get into her hadn't done much except make her eyelids heavy. Maybe some had leaked. Maybe she metabolized it fast. It didn't matter. She was still there, fully there, and I hated that. I took out the syringe with my blood in it and held her arm down. She looked at the syringe, then back at me, and said, "You think this makes us the same?" I shoved the needle in. She didn't scream. Her face twisted, but she kept looking at me the whole time. That unnerved me more than crying ever had. After it was done, I expected the usual crash. Anger giving way to shock, then bargaining, then fear. Instead, she said, "I'm not dying in this room." I told her she didn't get to decide that. She said, "Neither do you." That night, I set her leg as badly as I could manage, because I didn't want her bleeding out or going septic before I decided what to do. I don't know why I bothered. Maybe because something in me had started wanting the basement room occupied for as long as possible. A live witness hidden under my feet gave the house a pressure I had become addicted to. Rachel lasted 3 days. On the second day, she was quieter from pain and exhaustion. She asked for water. I gave it to her. She asked to use the toilet. I brought up a bucket. She looked at it, then at me, and said, "I hope you live long enough to rot slow." By the third day, fever had set in from the leg injury. She drifted in and out. Once she woke up and started talking like she was somewhere else, asking her brother if he had fed the dog. Another time she opened her eyes and said very clearly, "Somebody will notice me missing." I said maybe. She said no, they will. There was something frightening about how certain she sounded. Not because I believed the police would suddenly appear, but because certainty itself felt foreign in that house. I had been living for so long in secrecy and half measures and contingency plans that hearing someone say they would be missed made me realize how long it had been since I belonged to anybody. That night there were headlights in the driveway. I felt every muscle in my body lock. Not one car. 2. I turned off the basement light and went upstairs as quietly as I could. Through the front window I saw a sheriff's department SUV and another vehicle behind it. My first thought was Rachel. My second was all the bodies in the ground. My third was that I should have left months ago. There was a knock. Then another. Harder. I stood in the hallway, breathing through my mouth. They called out, asked if anyone was home. I should have stayed silent. Instead, I answered. I don't know why. Maybe part of me was tired. I opened the door a crack with the chain still on. The deputy on the porch was young, clean cut, with cold weather pink in his cheeks. Another stood a few feet back. One of them asked if I was alone. I said yes. They said they were looking into a missing person. A woman matching Rachel's description had come to this property for a job. Her brother had reported her missing after she stopped answering her phone. They wanted to know if she had shown up. I said yes. She came by, but left after seeing the dresser, because I told her I didn't need help after all. The younger deputy asked if they could come in and look around. I said no. He asked why. I said because I know my rights. He looked past me into the house. I knew what he saw. A man too thin, too pale, living alone in a place that smelled wrong. Maybe that was enough to make him suspicious. Maybe it was the blood under one of my fingernails I had missed. Maybe it was luck finally running out. Then, from the basement, Rachel screamed. It wasn't a word. It was just a raw, torn sound. Feverish, animal. unmistakably human. I slammed the door and broke the chain trying to shut it fully, but the deputy had already driven his shoulder into it. We collided in the entryway. I hit him once in the jaw and he stumbled, more surprised than hurt. The second deputy came through low and hard and took my legs out. We all went down. My cheek hit the floorboards. A knee crushed into my back. I felt one arm yanked behind me so far I thought the shoulder would come apart. I kept fighting anyway. Not to escape. I think by then I just wanted to hurt somebody one more time. They cuffed me on the floor while Rachel kept making those ruined sounds under the house. The first deputy shouted for his partner to clear the basement. He got off me and ran. I lay there tasting dust and blood, cheek pressed to old wood, and listened. Footsteps on stairs. A shout. Then another voice, sharper, changed by what it had found. A few minutes later there were more cars, more lights, radios, boots. The whole house filled with people and movement and cold air from the open door. Somebody read me my rights while a paramedic stepped over my legs carrying equipment. One of the deputies came back upstairs looking sick. Not dramatic movie sick. Real sick. Tight around the mouth. Eyes avoiding me. I asked if she was alive. He stared at me for a long second and said, "What the hell are you?" Nobody answered my question. They took Rachel out on a stretcher. I only saw her for a second through the blur of bodies, but even that was enough. Her face was shiny with sweat. Hair stuck to her forehead. One arm strapped against her chest. She turned her head toward me as they carried her past. I thought she'd spit at me or curse me. Instead, she just looked. There was no triumph in it. No fear either. Just a look that said she had seen the bottom of me, and it wasn't deep, only foul. Once they started digging up the yard, everything else came fast. They found Darren in pieces, or enough of him. Nicole, Luis, Evan, others. Some I had already half forgotten by the names on my fake accounts. Teeth, bones, scraps of clothes, jewelry, a belt buckle, IDs warped by moisture. The burn barrel gave them more. The basement gave them stains I hadn't managed to erase. The room itself told the rest. Restraints, syringes, blood traces, hair, skin under the bed frame. My whole secret life came apart under white lights and cameras and gloved hands. Rachel lived long enough to tell them what I had done to her. Long enough to tell them about the syringe and what I said was in it. I know because my lawyer told me later. She lived long enough for the state to build a case that barely needed the bodies. She died in the hospital from complications related to the injury and infection before the trial finished. They put that on me too. Maybe the thing you expect here is regret. Maybe you think prison turned me soft, or religion found me, or sickness finally taught me humility. That would make a nicer story. What I feel most days is harder to explain. Some of it is regret, yes, but not in the clean way people like. I regret practical things. I regret not leaving when I had chances. I regret Rachel's brother being right about where she went. I regret that basement room existing at all because it means there was a place in the world ready to fit what I became. I regret the faces more than the deaths sometimes. Darren half drugged and realizing. Nicole holding that fake family photo. Luis with my hands on his throat before the wrench hit. Evan asking why. Rachel on the ground with bone through her leg, still trying to crawl. The murders were brutal because reality is brutal when a body is involved. There was no elegant evil in any of it. Just panic, force, smells, fluids, pain, cleanup. I used to think being a monster would feel big. It didn't. It felt cramped, repetitive, mean. It felt like living in a narrowing tunnel and dragging other people in so I wouldn't be alone there. I got what I wanted in the ugliest possible sense. I made people suffer because I was suffering. I made them carry fear because I couldn't carry mine by myself. Every time I infected one of them, whether it would have taken or not, I believed for a few minutes that I had shifted some of my sentence onto another body. It never worked. I was still in mine. I am still in it now. The prison infirmary smells like disinfectant and old paper. My hands shake more than they used to. I get tired writing this. Some nights my gums bleed onto the pillow. Sometimes I hear coughing from down the hall and my body still reacts. That old animal response to sickness near sickness. The irony of that isn't lost on me. I became the thing I hated, and then something worse than that. A man who wanted his condition to spread because he could not bear being singled out by it. People ask in interviews, through letters, through psychologists trying to flatten me into reasons, whether I wanted to kill or punish or infect. The answer is yes to all three. But none of those words get the whole shape of it. What I wanted was company in terror. I wanted someone else to wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, stare into darkness, and know their body had become a place of judgment. I wanted them to think of every hand they had touched and wonder who they had already harmed. I wanted them to feel cut off from the ordinary world the way I did. That desire was rotten from the start. It didn't come from justice. It came from envy. Pure, humiliating envy. Healthy people do not understand how much of their life rests on not thinking about blood. They bleed and heal. They touch and move on. They get scraped, kissed, stitched, tested, and it all stays ordinary. Once blood becomes loaded with meaning, every small thing changes shape. That change hollowed me out. Then I filled the hollow with other people. You want the scary part, the part that stays after the story is done. It isn't the basement. It isn't the bodies in the yard. It isn't even what I did with the syringes. It's this. For a long time I looked normal enough. Sick, maybe. Bitter, maybe. Lonely. Thin. The kind of man a cashier wouldn't remember after ringing up soup and medicine. The kind of man a woman might still agree to help for cash on a weekday afternoon. The kind of man a younger person might meet for tickets, or a ride or a date because nothing on my face announced the room under my house. That's what should bother you. Not that I was insane in some wild, obvious way. I wasn't. Not at first. I paid bills. I answered texts. I stood in line. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the radio low. I knew how to sound embarrassed, polite, interested, harmless. I knew how to make a person feel slightly guilty for doubting me. I knew how to let silence do work. I knew how to use the normal parts of life as bait. Even now, if you saw the old photos from before I got really bad, you would not pick me out of a crowd as the one who would build a room for suffering and fill it. That's the truth that kept proving itself over and over every time someone came down my driveway. They never thought they were walking toward a man who wanted to press his sickness into them like a curse. They thought they were answering an ad, helping with furniture, meeting for sex, having a drink, buying something cheap, getting through another ordinary day. So did everybody until it was too late. I used to tell myself that the person who infected me must have known and done it on purpose. It helped to believe in that kind of enemy, because it meant my hatred had a place to point. The joke is that I never found out. Maybe it was malice. Maybe it was carelessness. Maybe it was just life moving filth from one body to another until it reached mine. But I know exactly where the evil started after that. It started when I decided pain was a thing to hand off. It started when I looked at another person and thought, you can carry this for me. Everything after that was just logistics. There are men in here who still try to talk to me sometimes. Not many, but a few. Some are bored. Some are curious. Some think if a man is hated enough, there must be something almost impressive in him. They're wrong. There's nothing impressive in what I was. I was small, mean, cowardly. I hurt bound people because unbound people might have beaten me to death. When the lights go down and the infirmary settles into its nighttime sounds, I lie awake and picture the house. Not the dramatic parts, the stupid details. Peeling paint over the kitchen sink, the soft spot in the third basement step, Rachel's boot print dried in mud by the back door, the fake family photo on the shelf with strangers smiling into a life they never knew would sit in a killer's house as decoration. I wonder sometimes whether the current owners, if there are any, feel something wrong in the walls. People like to believe places hold memory. I don't know if that's true. Concrete holds stains. Wood holds smells. The rest might just be what people bring with them. If the place holds anything, it should hold the sounds. Begging, choking, the smack of metal on bone, my own breathing, ragged and excited and scared. Rachel screaming up through the floor while the deputies stood on my porch, and I still tried to lie. That scream ended me. The thing is, she wasn't trying to save the world when she made it. She was trying to save herself. That's the most honest sound I ever heard. More honest than any confession. It was pure refusal. The body rejecting what was being done to it. Maybe that's why I still hear it the clearest. I used to think the worst thing in my life was the diagnosis. It wasn't. The worst thing was what I built out of it. If there is any lesson in my story, it isn't about sickness making people evil. Plenty of sick people suffer without turning outward. Plenty of humiliated people do not become predators. The disease didn't create what I did. It gave me a shape to pour my worst instincts into. And I chose to pour. That choice happened again and again. At the clinic when I could have told the truth to the people I'd been with. At the start of treatment when I could have stayed with it and faced what I was. The first night online when I noticed how easy strangers were to manipulate. The day I rented the house. The hour I cleaned the basement room and made it ready. The moment Darren realized why he was tied down, and I still went ahead. Everybody after that. I made those choices as a person, not a symptom. That is all.